These are your video instructions for installing a precision plastics enclosure on an IX83 microscope. Alright, these are the parts bags that will come with the enclosure. These are the tools you'll need. A low torque, battery powered Phillips head screwdriver or a manual Phillips head screwdriver, a box cutter, a 4mm Allen wrench, a 3mm Allen wrench, a 3/32 inch Allen wrench, and a small Phillips screwdriver. Remove the enclosure from the box. Unwrap the pillar assembly that goes on the back of the enclosure. Using a small screwdriver, remove the cover on the back of the pillar and cover the openings with electrical tape to block the air and light from getting through. Then reinstall the back pillar panel. Place the enclosure back panel on the pillar. Use the screwdriver to align the holes. Put the screws in lightly. Do not over tighten. You're going to need to adjust this later. Remove the screws from the back of the pillar, this panel. Place the top of the pillar assembly over the back of the other one and pull up to secure it. Making sure, remember, that these tabs fit over the back of the panels on the side. Now install the screws to tie the assembly together. This is what it looks like when you're complete. These are brackets that go over the adjustment knobs to help secure the top panel. Put them in place. Tighten the screws snugly. These do not get adjusted later. Now cut a small piece of tape about 2 inches long and put it to close the light gap that's there, as you can see in the picture. Now remove the foam, and we're going to disassemble the enclosure to release the two bases. Remove the screws. Now you see there's two screws inside tying the two bases together. You need to remove those and set them aside. They're longer than the other screws. That's the two long screws. Keep them separate. Loosen the screw closest to the base on the sides and the back, the front on this side, the front on right there, and also on the back. Just loosen them so they're sticking out about 1/8 of an inch. Now it's kind of pry this. The gasket's a little sticky, so kind of pry things apart a little bit and pop the base off. Set that base aside. Get the left base, and we'll install that first. If you have a ZDC, go ahead and remove the ZDC at this point, and we'll put it back in after assembly. Now there are two mounting screws and holes that on the side. Go ahead and put the provided 6mm screws in and tighten them gently. This should be we're going to tighten those up later. After installing the right base, we remove the right back panel from the enclosure assembly. Install the back panel using the 6mm cap screw provided and mount into the existing hole in the back of the microscope. Tighten loosely. Now take the right base, place it on the microscope, and using the 2 long screws removed earlier, assemble the 2 bases together. Be sure that's setting flat on the microscope, not like the picture shows. Those screws can be tightened fully. Now position the back panel and using the Allen wrench to align the holes, install these screws holding the back right panel to the base. Now you can take the enclosure assembly and put it over the bases. It's helpful to open the doors and kind of pull on the sides to get it to pop into position. Now again, using the Allen wrench to align the holes, you can start installing the screws. The screws should go in easy. If they are not wanting to go in easily, do not put them in. Just realign things. Don't want to cross thread anything. It's a good idea to not put the screws all the way in with the battery-powered drill, and it's better to go back with a manual screwdriver and snug those up later. This is the gasket to plug a leak where the pillar comes down. Put it right there. If you don't want it to stick permanently, put some electrical tape down first. It's a very aggressive adhesive. Peel the backing off. Place it on the pillar stand. And that will create a light, tight space there. If you do not have a ZDC, you will have a cover plate that goes on under the left side, as you can see there, and is held in place by several screws. If you do have a CDC at this point, you can just slide it in place. Of course, you won't have the cover plate installed. And then tighten. This is what the enclosure looks like when it's assembled. At this point, make sure that the back panels are adjusted. You can move them up and down a little bit in the slots, and the gasket between the pillar and that back panel allows for adjustment front to back. Make sure everything operates smoothly and then tighten those screws. So that's the assembled enclosure. Now to install a manual stage, you need to remove this assembly here. Pull the cover plate off, and from inside you can push down on the foam, and on top of the foam is another piece of black plastic. Your handle goes through the opening. You can separate the first layer of plastic, put it over the handle, pull the foam apart, push that up over the handle, and then the cover plate is also split to go over the handle. So you take the whole assembly, put it back in, and reinstall the screws. This will give you a light and gas tight seal around the manual stage handle. You have a wireway here, which can be opened up for running cords through and then retightened. It's our CO2 port, air port. Also on this side on the bottom, we have a wireway that will allow for cords running down. Of course, here you have the perfusion port, so if you need to run perfusion lines through, you can do that right there and still maintain a tight seal. Now we're going to show you how to assemble and install the CO2 controller. You have the CO2 controller. The clear tube is for connecting to the CO2 tank. That's a calibrator for use later, the power supply. Take the CO2 container, attach the sensor plug to the back of the CO2, then attach the sensor to the other end of the cable. Place it on top of the microscope. Remove the 3 screws holding the sensor flange. Before you take it off, put your finger in. There's a small O-ring there that seals around the sensor. You need to capture that. Push your sensor through and then put the O-ring through, and you'll see there's a small bevel on the inside of that, that flange. Reinstall it. Tighten the screws, and you'll find you have the sensor is tight in place and sealed. You can coil that the excess wire any way that's convenient and fits in the particular application. Now take the plug hose and attach it to the output barb on the CO2 sensor and into the marked barb on the hose flange. Then you take your clear hose and plug that into the input barb on the CO2. The other end will hook to your pressure controlled CO2 feed. Be sure to read the instructions about the amount of pressure that can go into that CO2 controller. When installing the hose for the heater humidifier, it is helpful to trim the ends of the hose where you cut it. The T is labeled heater and enclosure. Be sure to orientate it properly or it will not work. Using the clamp and a small piece of hose, connect the heater to the humidifier. That is air out on the heater and heater end on the T, the acrylic T. Now install a hose from the humidifier to the air in on the enclosure. Next we run a hose from the air in on the heater to the air out on the enclosure. Now connect the sensors to the back of the heater. Run those through the wireway and into the enclosure. It's generally best to keep those near where the specimen will be. Now connect the humidifier to the back of the heater. You need to fill the humidifier, just pull the T up, remove the container, and fill with distilled water. Check to make sure all your connections are firmly attached. Install the power cord, and remember the on-off switch is in the back of the heater. You have a variable speed fan, so when first turning it on, turn it all the way up. After a half hour, 45 minutes, when it's got to temperature, turn it down to avoid turbulence. Turn the humidifier on. It will not operate until the enclosure is up to temperature. It's important to remember to put the heater and the humidifier someplace other than the lab table. They should be on a shelf, they can be on the floor, but they should probably best not be on the lab table because they may create some vibration. Always keep the hoses as short as practical. You have a total of 12 feet of hose given to you. Don't use it all unless you need to. Too long a hose will result in too much heat being lost through the tubing.